Welcome to Alien Shadow. If you love epic sci-fi stories where humanity shines, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for thrilling HFY adventures. Join us and be part of the journey. The unexpected silence of the auction hall was filled with noise. The air was thick with the hum of excited voices, alien buyers moving about, their eyes scanning the array of slaves before them. Various species stood on display, each one a piece of property to be sold to the highest bidder. The sight was as familiar as it was unsettling. This was how the universe worked, or so the people thought. Among the many slaves, there was one woman who stood out, though not in a way that most would notice. Her appearance was far from extraordinary. She had the typical features of her kind, tall and lithe, with sharp eyes that gleamed with quiet defiance. But the look in her eyes, deep and worn, told a different story. This was a woman who had lived through unimaginable pain, a woman who had lost everything. Her name was unknown, her past erased. She had been sold over and over to different masters, each one treating her as little more than a possession. Today, she stood once again on the auction block, her chains cold against her skin. The bidding was fierce, as it always was. One buyer stepped forward, offering their credits for the chance to own her. Each bid was a reminder of how little she mattered to them, just another body to use, to control. She stood there silently, her expression unreadable. As the price climbed higher and higher, yet no one seemed interested in her. The alien buyers, after looking at her briefly, turned away. It was as if there was something about her that repelled them. She was broken, unremarkable, and too damaged for them to see any value in. To them, she was just another discarded slave left behind in a cruel system that never showed mercy. But in the back of the hall, a human stood. His eyes were not like the others in the room. They weren't filled with greed or desire. They were full of something else, a deep, quiet sadness mixed with determination. His name was Marcus, and he had come to the auction with no intention of buying anything. He was a soldier, a warrior from Earth, just passing through on a mission. But when his eyes fell upon the woman on the block, something inside him shifted. He couldn't explain it, but he felt an overwhelming need to do something. The crowd around him continued to bid, the noise deafening. But Marcus only had eyes for her. Her silent defiance called to him in a way that he couldn't ignore. She had endured so much, and yet she stood there, her head held high, as if refusing to break. In that moment, Marcus realized something that no one else in that room had. She was not just a slave. She was a person, a soul worthy of respect and dignity. Not just another item to be bought and sold without thinking. Marcus stepped forward, his hand raised. His voice was firm as he spoke, cutting through the noise of the bidding. "I'll pay the price," he said, his words drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The auctioneer, taken aback, paused for a moment before continuing. He had not expected a human to bid on a slave, let alone one who appeared as broken as this woman. But Marcus didn't care. He would pay whatever it took. He couldn't stand to see her remain in chains. The crowd fell silent. Whispers spread like wildfire as everyone realized what was happening. A human outsider was about to buy a slave, one that none of the other buyers wanted. The auctioneer blinked in surprise, but quickly nodded, accepting the bid. In that moment, the woman on the block looked up at Marcus, her eyes narrowing. For the first time, she saw someone looking at her as if she mattered, as if she were more than a mere object. But the look in her eyes was not gratitude, it was suspicion. She had been hurt too many times to trust easily. Marcus took a deep breath as he walked toward her. The chains that bound her were heavy, but they didn't weigh her down as much as the emotional scars she carried. She had been sold so many times, used and discarded like a piece of furniture. But this human, this man who didn't look at her like a thing to be owned, was different. As he stood before her, their eyes met. She stared at him, her face unreadable. Marcus felt a rush of uncertainty. What was he doing? Had he stepped forward when everyone else had passed her by? He could have just walked away, continued with his mission, and left this woman to her fate. But something inside him refused to turn away. "I'm here to help," he said softly, his voice low but steady. "You're free now." She didn't respond, but her eyes flickered with something: anger, confusion, or maybe just disbelief. She had heard empty words before. She had been promised freedom many times, only to have it stolen from her. What was one more human in a galaxy full of predators? The chains were unlocked, and as the last of the metal fell away, Marcus extended his hand to her. She didn't take it immediately. Instead, she looked at him with caution, as if waiting for him to betray her. But he didn't move. He simply stood there, offering his hand. After what felt like an eternity, she finally reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it in his. In that brief moment, something passed between them, silent understanding, a bond forged in that unexpected silence. It was the beginning of something new, something neither of them could have anticipated as they turned to leave the auction hall. The crowd stood still, their eyes wide with disbelief. A human had bought a slave, yes, but this time, something was different. The woman was no longer just an object to be owned. She was free, and in that freedom, her journey would finally begin. A bond unseen, the days after the auction were quiet, too quiet. Marcus had taken her to a small ship on the outskirts of the planet, far away from the chaos of the marketplace. The hum of the engines was the only sound that filled the small cabin. As they traveled through space, the woman, whose name he still did not know, sat across from him, her eyes distant and unreadable. She said little, her gaze often fixed on the stars outside the window. Marcus didn't push her to talk. He understood the weight of silence. He had seen it in the eyes of other slaves, the heavy burden of years spent in captivity, where speaking was unnecessary, where nothing anyone could say would ever change their fate. But he wasn't like the others. He wasn't like the buyers in the auction hall, the ones who treated her as less than human. He had freed her, but he knew that freedom was more than just taking off chains. He broke the silence one day as they floated in the quiet vastness of space. "I know you probably don't trust me," he said, his voice calm but filled with honesty. "But I'm not here to hurt you or make you a slave again. You're free, and I'll help you find a new life. That's all I can promise." She didn't look at him. Instead, her eyes were fixed on the dark expanse of space. For a long time, Marcus thought she wouldn't answer. But then she spoke, her voice soft and raw, as if each word caused her pain. "You freed me, but for what?" she asked. "What does freedom mean if all I've known is pain? What happens to someone like me after all the years of being used?" "There's nothing left." Her words cut through him, sharper than any blade. He could hear the fear beneath the anger, the fear of something more than just being enslaved. It was the fear of being lost, of never finding a place in a world that had only ever treated her as an object to be discarded. Marcus knew that this was no simple rescue. It wasn't about just saving her body. It was about healing the scars left deep inside her soul. "I don't have all the answers," he said quietly, "but I can promise you one thing. You don't have to face this alone." She looked at him then, her eyes hard, as if searching for something, perhaps a lie, or a reason to believe him. Marcus could see the skepticism in her eyes, the distrust that ran deep. He had seen it before in others who had been broken by their pasts. But something in her eyes, despite all the walls she had built around herself, told him that there was a part of her that still wanted to hope. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why help someone like me? You could have just walked away. You could have let someone else buy me. Why didn't you?" Marcus paused, looking out the window at the stars. His mind flashed back to the auction hall, to the moment he had stepped forward, his hand raised in defiance of the cruelty surrounding him. It hadn't been a calculated decision. It hadn't been planned. It had been an instinct, a pull inside him that he couldn't ignore. "Because," he said finally, "I couldn't turn my back on you. I've seen too much suffering in my life to ignore it when I have the chance to stop it. I'm not a hero, and I'm not looking for glory. I just saw Euryale, saw you wand. I knew I couldn't leave you behind." She turned her gaze away, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her worn clothing. Marcus could tell that his words hadn't entirely reached her, but that was okay. He didn't expect her to trust him immediately. Trust wasn't something you could build overnight. It was a slow process, one built over time with actions, not promises. The next few days were quiet. They traveled from one unremarkable planet to another, moving from place to place, trying to stay off the radar of the authorities. Every now and then, Marcus would catch her watching him, her gaze calculating as though she were trying to figure him out. He didn't mind. He knew that trust had to be earned, not given freely. One day, while Marcus was busy with ship repairs, the woman approached him. For a brief moment, he thought she might say something, ask him a question, or maybe even express some kind of gratitude. But instead, she simply handed him a small, old pendanta, simple piece of jewelry. Worn and weathered, but clearly precious to her. "Here," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "You gave me freedom. This is all I have to offer in return." Marcus took the pendant from her hands, feeling the weight of it in his palm. He didn't know what it meant to her, but he could sense its significance. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a symbol, a token of trust, and for the first time since they had met, he saw a small crack in the walls she had built around herself. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly, slipping the pendant into his pocket. "But thank you." She said nothing more, but as she turned away, Marcus noticed the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was their tiny glimmer of hope. A sign that perhaps, just perhaps, she was starting to believe that there was more to life than survival. And in that moment, Marcus knew they were on the right path. It wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead was uncertain. But they had taken the first step together, and that was all that mattered. The price of freedom, the silence between Marcus and the woman, had grown less heavy over the days. But neither of them spoke much. Instead, they focused on surviving, finding safe places to rest, hiding from the watchful eyes of bounty hunters and slavers. The woman, whom Marcus now called Asha, was slowly becoming more accustomed to the human beside her. Her mistrust remained, but she no longer recoiled from his presence. She'd learned, in her own way, that he would not betray her. But the peace they sought was fleeting. The shadow of danger loomed over them like a storm cloud waiting to burst. One night, as they docked at a quiet port, an old transmission flickered on Marcus's communication device. The message was simple, but its impact was immediate. "They know she's escaped." Asha's eyes, once distant, now burned with a quiet fury. "I knew this wouldn't last," she muttered, staring at the message as it blinked out of existence. "You can't escape your past. It always catches up." Marcus stood in front of her, his expression steady. "You're not alone anymore, Asha. We'll face it together. They won't find us, not if we stay smart." But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his mind. The universe was vast, and it was filled with many eyes. Slavers were relentless, and their reach was long. If they found Asha, there would be no escaping their clutches again. And for Marcus, failure meant losing the only chance he had at redemption. That night, while the ship sat in silence, Marcus couldn't sleep. He couldn't help but think about what this meant for both of them. He had rescued her, yes, but had he done it just for her, or for himself as well? Was this just an act of kindness, or was it a desperate attempt to find something he'd lost long ago? Asha, meanwhile, had her own thoughts. She paced back and forth in the small cabin, struggling with the inner turmoil that had been building ever since Marcus had set her free. She was thankful for his kindness, but that didn't erase the scars on her soul. Freedom, she realized, wasn't as simple as a change of location. It was a battle she hadn't prepared for. The universe hadn't let her go just because she was no longer shackled. No, her past would never just disappear. And the price of her freedom was more than she was willing to pay. The next morning, Marcus woke to the sound of Asha's quiet voice. She was staring at the sky through the window, her eyes distant. "I never thought I'd have the chance to escape," she said, her voice low, almost to herself. "But now that I do, doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like a trap." Marcus walked over, standing beside her. "You're safe now," he said, more to reassure himself than her. "You're free." Asha turned to face him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't read. "Freedom isn't just a word, Marcus, it's a price, and I don't think I'm ready to pay it." His heart sank, but he didn't show it. "I'm not asking you to do anything you're not ready for, but we can't go back. We'll find a place where they won't find us, together." She met his gaze for a long moment, her lips pressed tight, before looking away again. "I don't need your promises, Marcus. I've been promised everything before, only to have it torn away. You don't know what it's like to be sold, to be used, to be discarded without a thought. Freedom isn't worth much when you've lost everything." Marcus stayed silent, letting her words hang between them like a weight. He knew she was right. Freedom wasn't a clean slate. It wasn't a fresh start. It was a constant battle against the chains of the past. And Asha was still fighting that battle. They couldn't run forever. Marcus knew that. The longer they stayed on the move, the more likely they were to be found. The more they fought, the higher the cost would be. Asha had already paid dearly. And Marcus could sense that she was afraid of what else might be taken from her. But there was no turning back now. They had come too far, and for better or worse. They were in this together. That afternoon, they found a place to lay low for a while, a small, forgotten planet where the authorities rarely ventured. It wasn't much, just a run-down town filled with people who had long ago abandoned the idea of civilization. There they could hide, at least for a time. But hiding wasn't living, it was survival. And survival alone wouldn't be enough to heal the wounds of Asha's past. As night fell, Marcus found her once again sitting alone in the shadows. Her face was still a mask of unreadable emotion, but he could see the weight she carried, the burden she was too afraid to let go of. "I can't make your past disappear," he said quietly, taking a seat beside her. "But I can promise you one thing: you don't have to face it alone. Whatever comes next, we'll deal with it together." Asha didn't answer at first. Then, after a long pause, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what if your enemies come for you? What if the price of my freedom is your life?" Marcus met her gaze. There was fear in her eyes, but there was something else, too. Something like trust. Something small, but enough to make him believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make it through this. "I'll protect you," he said firmly. "No matter the cost." For the first time since they'd met, Asha looked at him without the walls she had once built. There was something fragile in her eyes, but it was their hope, the smallest glimmer of it, and for Marcus, that was all the reason he needed to keep fighting. Because, even in the harshest of realities, hope was something worth fighting for. Secrets revealed the winds on the small planet were quiet, a far cry from the storms that had battered them before. But the stillness felt unsettling, like the calm before a storm. Marcus and Asha had found some semblance of peace, but the unease between them remained. Though they were no longer on the run, the threat of the past loomed large, and the shadows of their former lives followed them like invisible chains. Asha had started to open up more, but only in fragments. Small pieces of her past whispered late at night, or shared in fleeting moments when she thought he wasn't listening. Marcus didn't press her for details. He knew the road to healing wasn't paved with forced confessions. But when she spoke, her words hit harder than any blow. He had learned that her silence was not just a result of distrust. It was a shield she had crafted to protect herself from a lifetime of betrayals. One evening, as the twin moons rose high above the horizon, casting a cold, silvery light across their hideout, Asha stood by the window, her figure silhouetted against the night sky. The gentle breeze tugged at her hair, and for the first time she seemed lost in thought. Far from the guarded woman she had been, Marcus stepped into the room, not wanting to disturb her, but knowing that something was different. Tonight, there was a tension in the air, an unspoken invitation to push further, to ask the questions that had been hanging between them since the beginning. He waited for her to speak. But when she didn't, he couldn't stop himself any longer. "Asha," he began softly, "you've been through more than anyone should bear, but I can see it's not just the chains that hurt you. It's something deeper. What happened to you?" Her shoulders stiffened at his words, and for a long moment she didn't answer. The silence between them stretched out, thick and suffocating, before she finally turned to face him. Her eyes were distant, her face a mask of old pain. "I never told you the full story," she said quietly, her voice strained. "Not because I don't trust you, but because sometimes it's easier to let the past stay buried." Marcus stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You don't have to tell me, but I can't help you heal if I don't understand. I need to know what happened. I need to know everything." Asha closed her eyes for a moment, and Marcus could see the internal struggle in her expression. The weight of her past pressed on her, pulling her down like the gravity of a distant, crushing star. But when she opened her eyes again, something had shifted. She no longer seemed like the quiet, distant woman he had first met. She was opening up piece by piece, but it was more than just revealing the truth, was shedding the weight of years spent in silence. "My name isn't really Asha," she began, her voice rough. "It's Kella, but no one calls me that anymore. Not since I was taken." Marcus said nothing, just listened as she continued. "I was born into a family of high standing among my people. My father was an influential leader, someone with enough power to control entire sectors of the galaxy. I was expected to marry into an influential family, to cement alliances. But I didn't want that life. I wanted to live for myself. I had dreams of freedom, of love, of being more than just a piece on a chessboard." She paused, her eyes narrowing as she looked at him, as though testing him. Marcus didn't speak, just kept his gaze steady, his silence urging her to continue. "But my father didn't see things that way," she went on. "He didn't see me as his daughter. He saw me as an asset, a tool to gain more power. He arranged my marriage without consulting me. I tried to run, I tried to escape, but I wasn't prepared. I was too naive, too weak. My own people captured me, sold me to the highest bidder, and my life as a slave began." Marcus's heart sank. As he listened to her story, he could see the raw pain in her eyes, the betrayal that still haunted her every word. "I had no say in my own future," she whispered. "I was nothing more than an object, no better than a piece of meat to be traded. I tried to fight back, but the harder I fought, the more they broke me." The more Asha spoke, the more Marcus understood just how deeply her past had scarred her. She hadn't just been taken from her family, she had been betrayed by everyone she trusted. Her father, her people, and even her own body had been used as a tool to advance the ambitions of others. I was sold over and over, she continued, her voice trembling with the weight of her confession. Each time I thought I had found a way out. Each time I thought I was free. I was pulled back in, chained tighter than before. My soul was fractured, piece by piece, until there was nothing left, nothing but anger and fear. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with emotion. Marcus didn't know what to say. He didn't have words that could ease the pain of a lifetime of betrayal. He only knew that, despite everything, she was still standing. She was still fighting, and that, he realized, was something worth fighting for. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. "I never knew." Asha looked at him, her eyes softening just a little. "I didn't want you to know," she admitted. "I didn't want anyone to know the things I've been through. But you deserve the truth. You deserve to understand what I've lost." Marcus reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "You haven't lost everything, Asha. You're still here. And you don't have to face this alone anymore. We're in this together." For a moment, she didn't respond, her gaze focused on the floor. But then, slowly, she lifted her head and met his eyes. In that gaze, Marcus saw a flicker of something he hadn't seen before. Hope. It was fragile, but it was there, like the first light of dawn breaking through the darkest of nights. "We'll get through this," Marcus said with conviction, feeling the weight of the promise he made. "I won't let your past define you. You're free now, and we'll build a new life together." Asha didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The connection between them had shifted, something deeper, something unspoken that said more than words ever could. A new hope. The morning sun filtered through the small cabin window, casting long golden beams across the room. Marcus stood by the window, gazing out at the alien landscape. The planet they had landed on was quiet, isolated, its inhabitants scattered, and unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon them. But peace never lasted long for those who were running from the past. Asha was sitting at the table, her hands folded in her lap, her face drawn with exhaustion. The conversation from the night before still hung in the air between them. She had shared more than she ever thought she would, and Marcus, for his part, had listened without judgment. But something had shifted, and the walls around her heart, though not gone, had begun to crumble, bit by bit. There was still pain, still fear. But there was also something else, something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Hope. Marcus turned from the window and walked toward her, his eyes serious. "We can't keep running forever. We need to figure out our next move." Asha looked up at him, her brow furrowing slightly. She was silent for a moment before speaking, her voice low but steady. "What's the plan then?" Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing. They had no allies, no safe haven, and no idea how much time they had before the slavers found them. The galaxy was vast, but it was also a web of danger, with eyes everywhere. Still, Marcus knew that if they were to have any chance of survival, they needed to stop running and start fighting. Asha needed to stop hiding from her past and start claiming her future. "There's a resistance," Marcus said finally, his tone firm. "It's a group of people fighting against the galactic powers that control the slave trade. They're scattered, but they're growing. They could be the answer we need. We can't keep running. We need to be part of something bigger than just the two of us." Asha's eyes narrowed, her skepticism clear. "A resistance. What makes you think they'll help us? We're just two people with no resources, no power. We're nothing to them." Marcus nodded, understanding her doubt. He knew what it was like to feel like you didn't matter, to feel like the world was too big to ever change. But there was something in him, something deep down, that refused to accept that they were nothing. "I didn't say it would be easy," he replied. "But we have one thing that most of them don't, a reason to fight. Your freedom is more than just a personal victory. It's a message. And if we can help them, if we can give them the strength to fight back, then maybe, just maybe, we can make a real difference." Asha stared at him, her expression hard to read. She had been through so much, and trusting anyone was a challenge. But in Marcus's eyes, she saw something that resonated with her. There was a fire in him, a belief that had been kindled by her, and it was contagious. Slowly, she nodded. "Double quotes fine," she said, her voice steady. "Let's do it. Let's join the resistance." The decision was a turning point for both of them. For Asha, it meant taking control of her life in a way she hadn't thought possible. She wasn't just running anymore. She wasn't hiding in the shadows, waiting for someone to decide her fate. She was choosing her own path. But it wasn't just about her freedom. It was about something bigger, something worth fighting for. Over the next few days, they made preparations. They scoured the planet for supplies, avoided detection, and reached out to any contacts Marcus had in the galaxy. The path ahead was treacherous. The resistance was not a safe haven. It was a battleground, but it was a battleground with purpose, with the chance to fight for something worth believing in as they prepared to leave the planet. Asha found herself standing on the ship's deck, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The journey ahead was uncertain, the risks high. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. It was fragile, a flickering flame in the dark, but it was there. Marcus walked up beside her, his presence a steadying force. He looked out at the stars, then turned to her. "This is just the beginning, Asha. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we're in this together, no matter what." Asha met his gaze, her eyes holding a quiet strength. "I know. I'm not the person I was when you first found me. But I'm not the same person I was yesterday either. I'm ready to fight." Marcus smiled, though it was tempered with the weight of what was to come. "Then let's make sure we win this fight." The ship lifted off, cutting through the atmosphere, and as it soared into the blackness of space, both Marcus and Asha knew they were no longer running from their past. They were moving toward a future that was uncertain, but one they could shape together. In the distance, the stars shone brightly, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a glimmer of light. And for the first time, Asha believed it could be enough to lead them to victory. The final stand, the silence of space, felt different now. The hum of the ship's engines had become a constant companion, and the stars that once seemed so distant and unreachable now felt like witnesses to their journey. Marcus and Asha had moved beyond the quiet hiding places, beyond the cautious steps of their escape. They were no longer running, no longer merely surviving. They were fighting. The rebellion had become a cause, a fire that burned brightly in their hearts. It wasn't just about Asha anymore. It wasn't just about her freedom. It was about the countless others who had been enslaved, about breaking the chains that bound entire civilizations. The resistance had offered them more than just a place to hide, had offered them a purpose. And now that purpose was about to be tested. The ship docked in the heart of the resistance's base, a hidden fortress tucked away on a moon orbiting a dead planet. Asha stepped out first, her boots crunching against the metallic floor, her gaze sharp and calculating. Marcus followed, his expression set, knowing that the risks ahead were far greater than any battle they had fought before. The resistance was gathering for a final assault on the slaver empire that had enslaved so many. A battle that would determine the fate of thousands, if not millions. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Infiltrate the slavers' central command and disable their power grid. Without it, their entire fleet would be rendered useless, their hold on the galaxy broken. But there was no such thing as a simple plan in war. It had already been compromised. The slavers had caught wind of the Resistance's movements, and now there was no going back. The final battle would be fought not in secret, but in the open, with everything at stake. Usha's heart raced as they met with the other leaders of the Resistance. Their faces were tired, worn down by years of struggle. But in their eyes burned the same fire that had fueled Marcus and Asha. The war was far from over. But it was coming to a head, and there would be no retreat. "Are you ready for this?" One of the leaders, a tall Zarian woman with a scar running down her cheek, asked Asha. She had seen the pain in Asha's eyes, but she had also seen the strength that had emerged in her. Asha nodded, her voice firm. "I've been ready for this my whole life." They had no illusions about what lay ahead. The mission would be a suicide run for many. The slaver forces were too strong, their defenses too entrenched. But they had no choice. This was their chance to end the cycle of oppression, to destroy the system that had stolen so many lives. As the briefing ended, Marcus and Asha were assigned to the front line, leading a group of rebels toward the heart of the slaver base. They were given the toughest mission: to infiltrate the heavily fortified communications tower and plant explosives, ensuring that the slavers could not call reinforcements. It was a suicide mission in every sense of the word, but neither of them hesitated. They had come too far, and there was no turning back now. The tension in the air was palpable as they boarded their transport ships. The fleet of rebels poised for battle. The plan was simple: break in, destroy the power grid, and get out. But Asha couldn't shake the feeling that it was never going to be that easy. The slavers were too powerful, their forces too organized. This was going to be a fight for their lives and for the lives of countless others. As the ships descended toward the enemy base, Asha could see the enemy forces already preparing for their arrival. The base was a sprawling complex, guarded by layers of defense, but the rebel fleet was determined to strike. As their ships landed, explosions erupted around them, and the air filled with the sound of laser fire and shouts of soldiers. Asha and Marcus leaped into action. Moving through the smoke and debris with practiced precision, Ali made their way toward the tower, dodging enemy fire and cutting down anyone who stood in their path. Asha's heart raced, adrenaline surging through her veins, but her focus was unwavering. She had been through worse, and this time she had something more to fight for. "Keep moving," Marcus shouted over the chaos, pulling Asha forward as they reached the entrance to the communications tower. "We don't have much time." The door slid open, and they found themselves facing a series of slaver guards, their weapons raised. Asha and Marcus didn't hesitate. They fired first, cutting down the guards in a flurry of motion, their movements in sync like a dance of survival. Inside, the tower was a maze of steel and wires, and Asha felt her pulse quicken as they raced toward the central control room, where the slavers were ready for them. Reinforcements arrived, and soon the narrow halls were filled with the sounds of battle. Asha and Marcus fought back to back, their actions smooth and deadly, but they were outnumbered. They had no time to think, no time to breathe. Then, just as they reached the control room, the door slammed shut behind them, locking them inside. The countdown to the explosion had already begun. Asha's heart raced as she hurried to plant the charges. The mission was almost complete, but the price was steep. They had sacrificed everything to get this far. Would they survive? As the last charge was set, Marcus glanced at Asha, his eyes meeting hers. "We'll make it," he said, though even he wasn't sure. The base shook as the explosion went off, the lights flickering, the walls trembling. They had done it. The slavers' grip on the galaxy was shattered, but their victory was still uncertain. The forces outside were closing in. It was not over. But in that moment, as the building around them began to collapse, Marcus and Asha knew one thing for sure. They had fought for something worth dying for. And in that truth, they had found a freedom that no one could ever take away. A future unwritten, the dust had barely settled after the final explosion. The battlefield around them was a smoldering wreck of steel and ash, the wreckage of a battle that would be remembered throughout the galaxy. The rebellion had struck a decisive blow to the slaver empire, but the price of victory was steep. Bodies, both rebel and slaver, lay scattered across the battlefield. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, blood, and burnt metal. And yet, amid the chaos, there was something that felt like hope, a glimmer that maybe, just maybe, they had turned the tide. Marcus and Asha stood side by side, their clothes torn, faces covered in dirt and sweat. Their weapons were sheathed, and their expressions were hard, but beneath it all, there was something else, a quiet understanding. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The future they fought for was still unwritten, still fragile, still waiting for them to shape it. They had done what they set out to do. The slavers were no longer in control of the galaxy's most powerful systems. Their fleet was crippled, their central command destroyed. But the galaxy was still a broken place, one where many were still trapped in chains, where many more needed to be freed. Asha's eyes scanned the horizon, the smoke rising from the ruins of the slaver base. The aftermath of war was always messy, always ugly. But it was also a place of beginnings, where new lives could be forged from the ashes of the old. And she realized something then. She wasn't just standing here as a survivor of her past, or as a woman who had been freed from chains. She was standing as someone who had helped change the galaxy, someone who had made a difference. "I thought I'd feel different," Asha said quietly, breaking the silence between them. "I thought that when the war was over, when the slavers were gone, I'd finally feel free. But now I'm not sure what to feel." Marcus turned to face her, his eyes soft but steady. "Freedom doesn't come all at once, Asha. It's not some sudden revelation. It's a journey. It's something you build, day by day." Asha looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long time. She had never expected someone like him to be the one who would change her life, someone who saw her as more than a slave. Someone who fought for her freedom and for the freedom of others, not because it was easy, but because it was the right thing to do. And in that fight, she had found something she hadn't known she needed, a sense of purpose. "Do you think we can really change things?" she asked, her voice soft, vulnerable in a way it hadn't been before. "Do you think we can rebuild this broken galaxy?" Marcus smiled faintly, his gaze turning toward the distant stars. "I don't know if we can fix everything. The galaxy is vast, and it's full of pain. But we can start with one thing at a time. We've done it before, haven't we? We've fought for the freedom of one person, and that's where it starts." Asha felt a flicker of something in her chest, hope, maybe, or the promise of something more. It was a fragile thing, but it was there. She had never been one to believe in happy endings, in the idea that things could just get better. But now, she realized, maybe that was because she had never truly believed in herself. She had never seen the power she could wield until she had started to fight for it as the remnants of the battlefield stretched before them. Asha turned to Marcus, a decision forming in her mind. "I want to help rebuild," she said, her voice steady now. "I want to help free the others who are still trapped in this system. I want to show them that freedom is possible, that it's worth fighting for." Marcus's expression softened, and he nodded. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll find those who are still enslaved, and we'll give them the same chance we fought for. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but we'll make it happen, together. Usha's heart felt lighter than it had in years, and yet, there was still work to be done. She had once been a prisoner of her own life, a woman defined by the chains she wore. But now, she was more than that. She was a warrior, a leader, and someone who could help others find the freedom she had once thought impossible. The path ahead was uncertain. They didn't know what dangers they would face, or how many more battles lay in their future. But for the first time in a long time, Usha didn't feel afraid. She didn't feel like a broken woman anymore. She felt like someone who could take on whatever the galaxy threw her way. Together, they walked away from the wreckage of the battle, the fire of their victory still burning behind them. The journey was far from over, but the road ahead, no longer, seemed so dark. They were no longer running from their past, they were forging a future. And that future, for the first time, felt like something they could shape.